Hey guys, Lowell at TechFix here, and I am in the TechFix Talk studio with
David Finch.
and we're going to talk about anything and everything. We don't have any sort of set precedents, but I do have some questions that I want to ask you. Where, this is probably the same answer. Where do you see, we see where the gap is. There's a struggle with the basics, and I totally 100% agree with you. We do a lot of testing on technicians. The modern technician has a firmer grasp of what we were talking about, that circuit that has source voltage, it has feedback, and it has control. They understand how a lot of like ABS works or ADAS. There's a real gap in like brake hydraulics.
Yes.
How do these components actually work? A real gap in drivetrain components. I see a lot of differentials and transmissions being replaced when there's probably a simple solution,
Right.
For those things. So that's a challenge. What do you think the biggest daily challenge for a technician is? And it doesn't have to be what to me, there's some industry-wide challenges, mindset challenges. What do you think some of the bigger challenges are for technicians?
Not having proper tooling is a big issue, and I see that a lot. And, not to pick on scan tool manufacturers, but if you don't have the information to put in, don't just substitute a value. We've talked about that before. It's just, it's harder on the technician. If he's going through stuff and he's looking at this, and I get guys that call me a lot from around the country, and they're like, well, these 7 PIDs are in red. Well, those 7 PIDs might not even be on that vehicle. And they give you full disclosure that we might not have all this information, but if you put it in red and these guys are looking at it, that's a red flag for them, right?
Sure.
So I think that has to change. I think we need to standardize that. We need to let technicians also know that, OBD2 generic data doesn't lie. You don't hear people talk about that a lot anymore. That was big when we started going OBD2.
Yep.
We need to let them know that, look, you don't always have to have the fanciest scan tool. Get a generic scan tool and get in there and read this data, because it can't lie, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I think, it begs another question, which I'm going to ask you in just a moment here. I think, as far as, I'm just going to ask it. It's a challenging field, right?
Right.
We both know this. You have to stay up, like just what you're talking about. Like, which scan tools do I use? What works on what car? There's a million of them out there now.
Right.
It used to just be, it was OTC and Snap-on, and then it became, whoever. There's a Chinese one that I used quite a bit. But anyhow, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Why do you want to be a technician? If it's this challenging, why do you want to do it?
The reward you get when you fix something?
Yeah, I do.
The reward you get when you fix something. And I always tell people, and I try to tell them in class too, I'm like, have you ever had a hard car to fix? You raise your hand. Everybody's going to raise their hand, right? You had a hard car to fix. Did you ever walk away from that hard car or that hard truck and think, man, I fixed it? When you walked away from it, did you know more about that system than when you first started? Yeah. Yes. You paid your training right then.
Yeah.
You might have took you 9 hours to fix
Right.
a 2-hour problem, but that was your training for the day.
Yeah.
You paid for it yourself. Now put it in your mind and put it in a file, because one day it's coming back and you're going to make it in that hour.
The best times in my career have been, I love to train. It's great. I love coming up with curriculum and doing all that. But I have to say the best time in my career were the times where I had another, like a fellow technician who was as trained and experienced as I was, right? Kind of like the conversations that you and I are having. It's
Right.
like we meet up in a lot of areas.
Right.
But it would be like, it was badass when I fixed the car that he couldn't.
Right.
And it happened the other way around too, but
Right.
It's a little bit of a challenge. I think inherently, technicians, if you're looking to get in this field, you're that guy anyhow, right?
Right.
You're not going to have a desk job,
Right.
right?
And you're not looking for the Superman on your chest when you fix it, right?
Right.
Everybody needs a second perspective. Like
Yeah.
you say, you had another guy of your stature, and you walk up to it, and we always used to joke. I had an older guy that worked with me, used to joke. He said, man, we can't figure this thing out. He said, I need to call my grandson. And I said, why? He said, because he's going to walk up and he's going to point to a vacuum line and be like, that's what's wrong. So, things like that you got to look at. It's just a second perspective always helps.
Yeah,
always
absolutely,
helps.
absolutely. I think you were talking about OBD2. We're kind of jumping all over the place here, but
Industry-wide.
industry-wide. I think there has to be another movement like that.
And we've spoken of that in the past, that we were going to go to another enhanced part of that, and nothing's ever really came of that.
Well, not to get too political here, but if you remember why and how that happened,
Yeah.
it was because manufacturers' data and manufacturer diagnostic systems were all different. So, some use speed density. There's a lot to go into there.
Right.
But what the problem was is they weren't sharing, and you had to have 20 different scan tools to be all makes, all model,
Right.
if not more. So we lobbied as independent automotive repair shops in America. We lobbied to standardize that, and we won. And to some degree, we were able to. But now it's like
it's starting to get gray again.
Yeah, it's starting to
get gray. And a lot of times you go to service information, and that service information is just so vague. I mean, you can go. I don't do a lot of gasoline engines anymore, but you can go to a lean code. And GM's just about taking that lean code out of their service information. They expect you to know what you're supposed to be looking for, which understood. But if you bring a young guy in that really doesn't understand that, I mean, it wasn't so many years ago. It was 2012ish. I was helping a guy do some curriculum content for a LML book, and it was the diagnostic trouble tree for a fuel. A customer comes in, customer complaint, lack of fuel economy. Number 3 on that list was check push rod length. Can you imagine a guy that rolls in his bay and he's going down that and he has to call a customer and tell him, I got to check push rod length. Now, the truck's not running bad, right? They're not running bad. We're just talking about fuel. And that to me, now they've since taken that out, because they've probably had calls and they're like, oh, I got to check my service. Nothing said check fuel. Nothing said quantity. If the tires were even, up to par. But it's just like, why? You look at some of the engineering terms in there.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I immediately would be like, there's a lot of other stuff I'm going to check first.
Yeah, that's right, right. But that's my point is, you get a young guy in, and you get a service writer that doesn't really know any better, and he goes to the front and says, okay, I need 11 hours to pull the push rods out.
Yeah. And that's just get them out. Yeah.
Right. And I've tried to always diagnose it, be least intrusive as possible, because how many times have you fixed the vehicle but broke something else in the meantime when you're trying to test it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just talking to somebody the other day, and I can't remember who it was, but they were more of that. Like, they wanted to get in there and check things out, like mechanically, where, a lot of our trainers, like guys like Eric Walker, he wants to do as much from the driver's seat as possible.
I do too. Yeah.
I'm that same way. Like, if I can use a scan tool, use a lab scope, use a gas analyzer, I can find a lot of stuff out about a vehicle without having to, hey, let's take the EGR valve off.
Yeah, well, I mean, and like I say, now if you break something, it's not like it's 2 days away. It's maybe not existent. The way parts are discontinued and the severity of anything anymore. And of course, look at the average age of a vehicle on the road. I mean, and plastic connectors, just taking stuff off. Just take a plastic connector off what are we going to change? Just check ohms. Why are we checking ohms in this plastic connector that we just broke? Right?
Exactly. That's funny. If you fix the cars, you fix the shop.